When the plus sign flickered onto the cheap plastic test in my tiny bathroom, the light above the mirror buzzed like a secret it could no longer keep. Rain rattled the window, impatient and nosy, and for a fragile heartbeat, I swore the apartment held its breath with me. There I was, barefoot on cold tile, a rumpled t-shirt hanging like a flag of surrender, the world cracking open at the faintest pink line. Baby. Mine. A syllable that felt like a key and a detonator. I pressed a palm to my belly, flat still, unassuming, and felt the echo of every decision that had led me here. The emergencies I had survived, the jobs I had stitched together, the men I had let go, the nights I counted coins into a coffee mug because savings accounts were for people with time, with fathers who returned calls, with health insurance not embroidered with disclaimers. I whispered a promise to the mirror, "We're going to be okay," and the mirror didn't argue. Not yet. The next day, my landlord texted me to swing by the office for a quick paperwork update. I figured it was a lease renewal form, an inspection notice, something beige and bureaucratic. Instead, I found him behind the desk in a polo the color of tennis balls, his smile gummy and practiced. The property manager perched beside him like a hawk pretending to be a houseplant. There was a printout on the desk. My name misspelled, the rent amount corrected in pen, arrows pointing up like accusations. He slid the paper toward me with 2 fingers. "Beginning next month," he said, the words oiled and frictionless. "Your rent will be $1,200. I felt the floor shift. "That's a 20% increase," I said, maybe too evenly. "The lease says you need 60 days' notice for any change." He tapped the paper, not the lease. "Market rate," he sang. "And to be frank with you, single moms are risky. Higher risk means higher cost. That's just numbers." It wasn't the amount that knocked the air out of me. It was the math of his mouth. Single moms, knocker risk. Risk, knocker, surcharge. Surcharge, knocker punishment dressed as policy. I hadn't told him about the baby. I'd told no one but the mirror and the rain. But there it was, laid out like a cheap fortune teller's spread. He knew, or he thought he knew enough to profit. Something bigger was moving beneath the floorboards of my life, something I'd always suspected but refused to name. An algorithm of contempt, coded by men who called themselves practical. That day I learned the rent wasn't the only thing rising. The story was rising. The temperature. The stakes. He had just placed a price tag on my unborn child, and he did it with a shrug. "Don't take it personally," he added, smiling with his teeth. And that was the first reveal. The price of my new life had been calculated in a room where my life wasn't allowed to exist. I took the paper. I took my indignation. I took the elevator down with my hands shaking and my jaw locked and my future blooming like a bruised dawn. The door slid open to a hallway smelling of lemons and old coffee, the kind of scent that suggests cleanup after a mess nobody wants to admit. I understood, suddenly and with a little laugh that hurt, that the mess wasn't mine. It was a system with a face and a signature and a polo the color of warning. It was a whisper-made policy. It was the word risky, unbuckled and reloaded. I didn't cry that day. Not yet. I walked into the rain and let it crown me with a wet, stubborn halo. "We're going to be okay," I said again, this time to the baby, to the building, to anyone listening behind the blinds. The rain answered by falling harder. The city answered with sirens, and the landlord, far above me in his office with the hawk houseplant and the tennis ball shirt, answered with a rent increase justified by a stereotype. But the story had only cleared its throat. The worst part wouldn't be the money. It would be the way people smiled when they said, "It's just policy," the way doors clicked softly as they closed, the way a line on a spreadsheet disguised itself as common sense, the way you can be told, very politely, to pay extra for the crime of needing grace. I live in a building called the Elms, though there isn't a single elm tree within a mile. It's a squat red brick complex off Madison and 14th in a Midwestern city that pretends it's coastal when the wind whips the river into whitecaps. My studio faces a parking lot where seagulls gather like critics. The elevator sticks between floor 2 and 3 if you don't press twice, and the walls carry the conversations of strangers like a confessional that forgot to close the curtain. I moved here 2 years ago with a folding couch, 3 cracked mugs, and the kind of optimism you wrap in newspaper and pretend won't shatter. I'm 31. I answer customer emails for an online stationery company that uses the word curate. So often you'd think paper needs a sommelier. I have a checklist taped to my fridge. Rent, electric, transit pass, prenatal vitamins. the last item written in smaller letters. A secret I am learning how to keep in plain sight. The baby's father is a name on my phone that I haven't dialed in months. He is not the villain, and that might be the saddest line of all. Sometimes absence is just a shape life fits around. When I got pregnant, Hope arrived with an off-key trumpet, loud, sincere, and a little embarrassing. I started noticing small, ridiculous miracles, how the bus driver crouched so a toddler could drop $1 into the slot, how a kid dragged a stick across the fence and turned rhythm into rebellion, how the baker on Pine Street slid an extra roll into a woman's bag and winked. I started holding my belly in grocery store lines the way you hold good news, casually, as if the world might overhear. So when my landlord, Mr. Novak, first name Darren to people he charged late fees, tapped that paper and told me I was risky, I felt the hope stumble. I understood that I had stepped onto a chessboard where my moves had been predicted. Maybe she'll cry. Maybe she'll threaten to leave. Maybe she'll swallow it. He was counting on me to swallow it. Before I swallowed anything, I reached for witnesses. If you're hearing me now, if you're reading this with your fingers curled into fists, I need you to be part of this. Tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments. I want to map the echo of this story, to watch it drape over continents like a flag stitched out of our stubbornness. Subscribe if you're new here, not for me, but for the women who will stand in offices like his and be told their babies are a liability. Share this with the friend who thinks she's alone. The algorithm doesn't care about justice, it cares about engagement. So let's feed it the truth until it chokes. Context matters. Darren bought the Elms the same year my hours were cut at the cafe. He fixed the fluorescent light in the hallway and took down the free library shelf in the laundry room because it attracts clutter. He replaced the old super with a property management company whose emails read like threats composed in a font called compliance. He kept a bowl of fun-size candy bars on his desk and made a point of offering them to women like a benevolence tax. When he told me single moms were risky, he did it with kindness frosting. Risky meant unpredictable. Risky meant needy. Risky meant non-compliant. There's a pattern you only see if you live low enough to feel every tremor. I watched Unit 2C, Keisha and her daughter Amara, get a notice for noise disturbances, 2 weeks after Keisha's second job added night shifts. I watched Maria in 5D receive a demand for an additional security deposit when her brother crashed on her couch after a breakup. They called him an unauthorized occupant, even though he stayed 6 days and left a thank you note. I watched the couple in 6A marry in the courtyard, the string lights, the portable speaker, the 30-minute ceremony, and then get a $250 event fee, because the lease did not permit gatherings that could disrupt community peace. Community peace, I learned, was a muzzle you were expected to kiss. When I told my friend Leah, law school dropout, barista, possessor of a spine you could play a melody on, she reached across my Formica table and squeezed my hand, hard. He said that to your face? He said it to my rent. She clicked her tongue. That's discrimination. It's math, I said, hearing Darren's echo and hating myself for repeating it. Or that's what they'll call it. Leah's eyes warmed with something like battle readiness. Then we're going to change the math. So listen, if you've ever been told your life is a line item, join me in this. If you've ever felt a door close softly because you asked for grace, tell me where you're listening from. I want to know the towns, the counties, the cities where stories like this bleed into the carpet. Subscribe so you'll see what happens when a landlord mistakes a woman for a statistic. Comment so the next single mom doesn't have to explain to a man in a tennis ball shirt why her child isn't a surcharge. The apartment is quiet tonight. The rain has moved east. The baby flutters like a fish learning the shape of its pond. I'm writing from a desk that wobbles, in a chair one tenant left when she moved out because it squeaks. I'm sorry. I'll keep the squeak. It reminds me the chair has a voice. So do I. So do you. And when voices stack, even a quiet building like the Elms can start to shake. I printed the Fair Housing Act and underlined phrases until the page looked like it had been through a storm of highlighter. No discrimination because of familial status. No penalties for the presence of children. No disparate treatment for pregnant tenants, though the language tiptoed around pregnancy like it had been written by people who thought babies arrived on schedules. The legal words were clean, while life was muddy. Still, I carried those pages into the next week like a shield wrapped in aluminum foil. Maybe flimsy, maybe enough to reflect his gaze back at him. On Monday, I emailed the property manager, a woman named Stephanie whose smile stopped short of her eyes. I quoted the act. I asked for a meeting. She replied with a link to a form and a sentence that smelled like perfume and formaldehyde. We are committed to fair housing. Commitment, I learned, is a word people use when they need a synonym for performance. Leah suggested we crowdsource wisdom. Neighbors, she said, are Wikipedia with lived experience. So we set up a table in the courtyard under the pretense of a yard sale, 2 mugs, a stack of paperbacks, a lamp that leaned. We laid out a sign-up sheet that read, Experiences with Management, anonymous if you want. People drifted by like it was a weather pattern, curious, cautious, kind. Within an hour, we had 10 stories. By sundown, we had 23. I was told my son couldn't draw with sidewalk chalk because it lowers property value. They fined me for leaving my stroller in the hall for 5 minutes when the elevator jammed. They said my daughter's asthma nebulizer made too much noise. They raised my rent when I went part-time to care for my mother. Said part-time tenants were unstable. Dots connected themselves like constellations. I could trace the outline. A strategy masquerading as standards. Rules used like levers. Fees like tripwires. If you jostled, the building shook a fine out of you. If you needed anything, the building charged you for the privilege of needing. The worst story came last. A woman named Nora from 3E, brown eyes tired and fierce, shared that her lease renewal required an additional month's deposit because she was considering adoption as a single parent. The manager had learned it in the laundry room and put it in writing like gossip blessed by a stamp. Nora didn't fight it. She paid, afraid to lose her place. I wanted to be a mother more than I wanted to be brave, she said with a half-smile that made me want to find every clipboard in the city and break it over my knee. We compiled the stories into a document Leah titled, The Elms Pattern. She is good at names. Patterns are harder to dismiss than incidents. Incidents can be accidents. Patterns have intention. I recorded my next meeting with Darren on my phone, tucked into my pocket, the screen dark and my pulse bright. He didn't notice. Men like him assume that if you are polite, you are unarmed. I did my research, I said. Raising my rent because you think I'm risky as a pregnant single tenant is discrimination. He leaned back, the chair creaking like it knew his weight. You're twisting this. We never said pregnancy. We said risk. Risk is universal. You said single moms are risky. I said single moms can be risky. He stressed the verb like it was a parachute. It's not personal. That's the problem, I said softly. It's so impersonal you think it's objective. He clicked his pen twice, authority disguised as fidgeting. Look, we've had issues. Unauthorized occupants, noise, payment plans that became never plans. We have to protect the building. We have to protect the community. Community, again, as guard dog. I pulled out a copy of the recording consent laws for our state and placed it on the desk. I didn't tell him I was recording. I told him I could. He glanced at the paper, then me, then the candy bowl and said, We're getting litigious, huh? Just precise. He smiled then, like we were 2 players in a friendly game and the ball had finally cleared the net. You're smart, he said. Smart women make excellent tenants. Don't get yourself into something you can't win. I left shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of being told the rules were a fog he controlled. My belly turned like a compass needle. That night I dreamed I was standing in a courtroom where the judge spoke in HOA bylaws, and the jury took notes and bullet points, and I held a baby that was made entirely of paper. When I woke, I knew what we had to do, not just complain, illuminate. We launched a neighborhood forum, quietly, privately, inviting tenants to share experiences. Leah designed a flyer with 2 sentences. Has the Elms charged you for living your life? Tell us. We slipped it under doors like contraband hope. Stories flooded in. We filtered out the noise and kept the signal. Dates, fees, phrases, emails. We built a timeline so precise it could have been a metronome. Then the second reveal. Someone from inside wrote to us. A former assistant in the management office. She sent a burner email with attachments labeled training notes. She had lasted 6 months before quitting. The job made her feel like a slot machine that paid out when people cried. The notes were a script, literally a script. Phrases to use, protecting the community, fairness to all tenants, policy, not personal, triggers for fees, strollers, extra keys, temporary guests, excessive packages, reported pregnancies, not proof enough for a courtroom maybe, but enough to shatter my illusions. We weren't unlucky. We were targeted. I took the pages to the mirror again. The same buzz of the light, the same wet city outside. We're going to be okay, I told us, but the definition of okay was changing. Okay wasn't just keeping the apartment. Okay was refusing to pay a toll for existing. The letter arrived on a Thursday, fat and officious, as if it ate other letters for breakfast. Notice of non-renewal, the subject line announced in polite font. My lease would not be renewed, due to repeated administrative challenges and concerns about compliance. I read it 3 times, and on the third pass the words rearranged into what they meant. You are loud, you are inconvenient, you are not profitable in the right way. I called Leah. They're evicting you by bureaucracy, she said, already moving, already gathering names like armor. We had prepared for this, half expecting it the way you half expect a storm after tasting metal in the air. That night, we called a meeting in the courtyard. Fairy lights strung between 2 sad maple trees suddenly looked militant. People arrived with folding chairs and the kind of determination you usually only see in emergency rooms and picket lines. Nora from 3E brought a thermos of coffee. Keisha carried a sleeping Amara who snored like a kitten. The couple from 6A, now 6B after the event fee forced their downsizing, held hands like a treaty. I received this today, I said, holding the letter up like a flag nobody wants to salute. Murmurs crawled through the crowd. I told them about the training notes. I read aloud the phrases we all knew by heart. I watched faces harden into something that looked like clarity. A man I recognized from 7C, tattoos like script up his arms, a softness in his eyes that didn't match the scowl he wore to the mailbox, stepped forward. I fix HVACs, he said, like an introduction and a confession. I can read systems. Here's how this one works. They treat empathy as a leak. They patch it with policy. We need to break the pipe. We decided to do something that management couldn't reduce to a fee. We decided to show up. Publicly, politely, precisely. Friday morning, we gathered in the lobby with strollers and briefcases and coffee mugs and toddlers who found every echo hilarious. We wore paper badges Leah printed, the Elms Community, which was either satire or prophecy. Our goal wasn't to shout. Our goal was to be undeniable. At 9 on the dot, Darren arrived in his tennis ball shirt, 2 sizes too bright for the hour. He stopped short at the sight of us, a mural of the building he claimed to protect. He hesitated, then smiled like he'd walked into a surprise party and intended to enjoy the cake. What's all this? He asked. Community, we said, almost in unison. I stepped forward. You sent me a non-renewal letter. You raised my rent because I'm pregnant. You called single mothers risky. He began. Leah held up her phone. We have your phrasing on record, she said, and her voice did not shake. We have training notes. We have a pattern. Darren's smile slipped, then fastened itself again, cheaper. If you have concerns, there's a process. Your process eats concerns and spits out fees, Nora said gently, and I swear the fairy lights flickered like applause. We didn't chant. We didn't block doors. We didn't give him the chaos he could weaponize. We handed over a packet. The Fair Housing Act excerpts, the stories, the timeline, the script. We told him we had already filed complaints with the city's housing authority and the state civil rights commission. We told him we had reached out to a local reporter who covered housing, someone who once wrote a piece titled The Price of a Stroller, which meant he understood economy in human terms. Darren looked at the packet like it might explode. You should have brought this to me first, he said. We did, I said. You called me risky. Something changed then. It wasn't victory. It was perspective. His. Shrinking by the second. Ours. Widening like dawn. He told us to schedule individual meetings. We told him we preferred collective ones. He told us policy could be reviewed. We told him people had been harmed. He said words about fairness and balance and mutual benefit, and we let him. Sometimes you have to let the script run out of ink before the truth can write itself. The reporter came 2 hours later. He was small and neat, and carried a notebook like a Bible. He listened, really listened, which is rarer than all the forms in the property office combined. Before he left, he asked me the question that cracked something open inside me. What do you want? Not what I deserved, not what would be legal, what I wanted. I looked at my neighbors. I looked at my belly, at the ghost of a child clapping along to rain. I want to raise my baby without paying a tax for existing, I said. I want policy that recognizes a stroller is not a threat. I want a home that isn't booby-trapped with fees. The story went live that Sunday. The headline was careful, but the content had teeth. He quoted Darren and Stephanie. They sounded like a focus group coordinated to sound benign. He quoted us. We sounded like people who were done apologizing for breathing. The comments poured in. Your cities, your states, your countries. I saw them ping across my screen like lights turning on across a map. Des Moines, Phoenix, Toronto, Dublin, Recife, Cape Town. I felt less alone than I had felt in years. I felt dangerous in the best way. Coordinated. Management responded fast, because money hates bad press. An email to all tenants offered a listening session. A follow-up clarified that rent increases would follow strict market analyses. Another email rescinded the stroller fee, the temporary guest fee, the event fee, progress, but also theater. We didn't stop. We brought the packet to a housing attorney who read it once and said, "You built the case I would have built." She sent a letter that made the law sound like a spine we all shared. She included phrases that lit up the page: constructive eviction, discriminatory intent, disparate impact, big words doing small, necessary work. Then came the final reveal, the twist that turned the lock. The former assistant sent a second batch of notes. This time, there was an internal spreadsheet. Rent increases planned not by unit, but by category. Category C, potential single-parent households. The code was deniable. The intent was not. It was a smoking gun that remembered fingerprints. We scheduled the collective meeting with Darren anyway, and we brought the spreadsheet. He stared at it long enough for us to understand he had seen it before. "What do you want?" he asked, finally echoing the question that had saved me. "Roll back the increase," I said. "Reissue renewals. Formalize family-friendly policy. Train your staff with someone who understands the act. And an apology. Not to me. To all of us." He rubbed his forehead like the numbers had turned into bees. "You know I can't." "Can," Leah said. "Won't is the word you're looking for." He looked around the room at people he had hoped would remain in their units, quiet as receipts. He saw Nora and Keisha and the couple from 6B, and the HVAC man from 7C, and the tall teenager who had drawn chalk galaxies on the sidewalk, and the elderly widow who loved those galaxies because they looked like the nights she once danced through. He saw the whole. And for the first time, I think he saw his part in the fracture. "I'll talk to legal," he said. "Do that," I answered. "We already have." The email arrived on a Tuesday, prompt and pale. After reviewing our practices, it read, "We have decided to rescind the proposed increase for apartment 4F and reinstate the lease renewal." It went on to outline a new family-friendly policy and a plan for staff training. There was no admission of wrongdoing, of course. There never is. But at the bottom, nestled like a reluctant apology, was a sentence that made me breathe easier than I had in weeks. "We regret any distress caused." Distress, they called it. We called it the price of breathing. Still, victory wears strange clothes. Sometimes it looks like an email that refuses to name what it did. Sometimes it looks like a stroller in a hallway that nobody finds. Sometimes it looks like chalk galaxies that nobody hoses away. I printed the email and taped it to the fridge, under the prenatal vitamins, beside the checklist where rent had once been the loudest word. The baby moves now with purpose, a river learning its banks. I feel her, yes, her, roll and doubt and decide. I talk to her about everything, about Leah's spine and Nora's soft steel, and Keisha's night shifts and the HVAC man's blueprint heart. I tell her that we live in the elms, where there are no elms, but there is a courtyard where people remember each other's names. I tell her that numbers are not neutral when they're aimed. I tell her that risk is a word people use when they're afraid of love's logistics. I don't know how long we'll stay. Maybe we'll outgrow the studio. Maybe we'll move to a ground floor apartment with windows that open without a negotiation. Maybe we'll leave the city and find a town where the river is less dramatic. But today, this is home. Today, the walls are not listening for excuses to charge me. Today, I'm allowed to be a mother without paying extra for the privilege. Here's what surprised me most. The villain in this story isn't a person in a tennis ball shirt. It's a belief that people like me are acceptable losses. It's a spreadsheet that pretends to be God. Darren will learn, or he won't. Stephanie will grow a conscience, or she won't. The building will sell to another company someday, and they'll rename it The Oaks, and install a gym that smells like eucalyptus. Fine. We will still be here, in one city or another, living out loud, refusing to be a risk line. If you're still with me, if any part of your body thrummed when you read "Single Moms Are Risky," subscribe. Not because algorithms are anything but a carnival of mirrors, but because when we hold the glass together, it breaks differently. Comment with where you're listening from. Tell me your stories. Tell me what they charged you for that wasn't theirs to price. I want this map to glow. I want this chorus to drown out every fake policy that calls itself peace. Here's my lesson, the one I want my daughter to learn in her bones. You will be told that your needs are inconveniences. You will be told that your joy costs too much. You will be told kindly that you are risky. Look at the person saying it. Look at the paper they're holding. Look at the door behind them. Then remember, you are not applying for permission to exist. You are announcing it. We didn't win because we shouted the loudest. We won because we listened to each other until the pattern revealed itself, and then we held it up to the light. We made their math show its face. We taught it to blush. And one more thing, in case no one has said it to you today, you are not a surcharge. You are not a line item. You are not a variable to be controlled by someone else's comfort. You are the headline. You are the miracle in the bathroom at dawn. You are the chalk galaxy that refuses to be washed away. Subscribe. Comment your city. Share this with someone who needs to know her rent is not a morality test. The rain has stopped, but the ground is still listening. Let's keep talking until it grows flowers.